It took Captain Elara Voss 3 seconds to earn her legend. 3 seconds and a single silent takedown. I was there. My designation is Zylos, and I was just another nervous cadet on the observation deck of the Obsidian Crucible of Vhar'Zeth, the toughest military academy in the known quadrants. Before she walked in, the hall was thick with noise, the low, vibrating anxiety of my companion, Scrix, the clatter of 100 different armored limbs, the endless, buzzing chatter of species built for battle. But when High Strategos Thalcora called her name, the human cadet, the first of her kind, it all just stopped. An absolute, total silence fell. And I mean a silence you could feel in your bones. It wasn't the disciplined quiet before a formal inspection. It was the primal, terrifying stillness of a jungle when a true apex predator enters the clearing. We stared at her. Small, too fragile, with no natural armor, no redundant limbs, no exotic venom. Just eyes. Forward-facing, unblinking eyes, the kind designed solely for tracking and hunting. Eyes that made my own segmented exoskeleton want to curl inward. We thought she was a scientific curiosity, a massive mistake from a fragile, irrelevant planet called Earth. What we discovered that day was that humanity, stripped of its technology, was the most brutally efficient killing machine the galaxy had ever overlooked. They didn't have claws, so they learned to find the weak points. They didn't have armor, so they learned to never be hit. They didn't have speed, so they learned the power of pure, unrelenting persistence. She didn't just pass the test, she broke the physics of combat. By the time the sun set on Vhar'Zeth, we didn't call her Elara Voss anymore. We called her the Quiet Reaper. And trust me, that name was earned with a quiet terror none of us ever forgot. This is the story of how one human redefined the meaning of war. Before we dive deep into the first phase of Captain Voss's impossible journey through the Obsidian Crucible, a story that will change everything you thought you knew about true combat, do me a huge favor. If you're here right now, hooked on this incredible story, don't just lurk in the shadows. You know the drill. Smash that like button, share this video with someone who loves a truly gripping sci-fi tale, and most importantly, hit subscribe and ring the bell to join the fastest growing community in the galaxy. Your support is absolutely crucial. It's what hypes up this channel and helps us bring these epic stories to a larger audience. We want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments below, from which part of the world are you watching this legendary tale unfold? I'm constantly looking for inspiration, so also give me your best suggestions for future sci-fi or military stories you want to see me cover next. Now let's get back to Zylos and the moment Elara Voss proved that humanity was, in fact, the most dangerous species in the cosmos. The air in the observation deck of the Obsidian Crucible of Vhar'Zeth wasn't just air. It was a pressurized mixture of high-altitude gases and the pheromones of 200 beings terrified of failure. The Crucible is the premier military academy in the known quadrants, a fortress carved into the side of a massive cold fusion core. It trains the best, which means it breaks everyone else. I'm Zylos, and as a cadet of the Cthari species, known for our advanced stealth camouflage and superior kinetic reflexes, I thought I understood pressure. But the moment Captain Elara Voss walked in, every single metric changed. She was the cause of that silence I told you about in the hook. Not the polite quiet you hold for High Strategos Thalcora, but that ancient, terrifying stillness that grips a forest just before the alpha strikes. It was an ancestral terror, a neurological alarm screaming that something was in the room that did not belong. She was small, yes, but her smallness was wrong. It was too dense, too self-contained, and unnervingly symmetrical. Where my people rely on multiple specialized sensory organs, she had only 2 of everything, arranged with baffling, efficient simplicity. I was in the third row, watching as her forward-facing eyes scanned the assembly. Now, you need to understand something about the eyes of most species at the Crucible. Mine are multifaceted, set on stalks for a 360-degree field of view. Others have infrared membranes or multiple redundant optics. Our vision is for awareness, to see the entire horizon and anticipate threats from all angles. Her eyes, however, were placed perfectly front. This frontal orientation, we learned, gives them superior depth perception, a terrifying focus. They were designed for one thing only, tracking a single target to extinction. Eyes of a true predator. Every time those focused pupils landed on a movement, even my nervous jaw clattering, a sign of Cthari anxiety, my exoskeleton wanted to retract inward, a primal defense mechanism against an unknown threat. It felt like being studied by a high-intensity laser, not observed by a peer. The data had been circulating for a cycle. Species, human. Origin, Earth. Specialty, undisclosed. That last part, undisclosed combat specialization, should have been a screaming klaxon. It was our first and most crucial warning and we missed it. We spent too much time debating their planet's primitive technology and not enough time studying their biology. High Strategos Thalcora, whose administrative scales were currently shifting through a weary but authoritarian blend of green and bronze, reviewed the data slate at the front. Thalcora, a Vhar'Zian elite known for his stoic command presence, looked particularly drained. The mere logistics of managing the first human cadet seemed to be taxing him physically. Cadets, his voice, tired but carrying the weight of 1,000 campaigns, resonated through the hall. Today begins your tactical evaluation week. You will be tested on speed, strategy, and pure survival instinct. The murmurs swelled up like a tide of anxiety. The tactical trials were infamous, known for their sheer, unapologetic brutality. We're talking real stakes. Last year, a Krillin cadet lost 2 limbs. They grew back, sure, but the message was clear. There is no easy path here and you are disposable. The air itself felt thick with the metallic tang of fear, a smell the human likely couldn't even process, yet she seemed completely immune to its effects. Thalcora, seemingly oblivious to the fear radiating off the crowd, continued. Your mission is simple. Track and neutralize the training drones in Sector 7. The first team to secure 5 confirmed eliminations wins. He paused, his focus settling on the human. Any questions? Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. And then the human hand went up. It was a small 5-digit hand, yet it drew all attention. Thalcora's internal eyelids flickered in annoyance and suspicion. Yes, Cadet Voss? Are there any restrictions on methods, Strategos? Her voice. It was calm. Too calm. A voice that didn't just ask a question, it stated a terrifying capability. It was so controlled, so devoid of the expected nervous tremor, that several cadets, myself included, instinctively checked the nearest emergency exits. It wasn't the content of the question, it was the implication that she was already considering options outside the boundaries of conventional combat. Within reason, Thalcora replied, the bronze in his scales darkening slightly. Standard combat protocols apply. No excessive force. No unnecessary environmental destruction. And, he paused, casting a pointed glance toward the massive, plated forms of the Morpidian contingent, a nod to their species' tendency toward enthusiastic grappling, no eating your partner. The Morpidian group collectively let out a slightly offended, low-frequency hum. Elara tilted her head in a swift, almost mechanical gesture. Understood, sir. A finality in her voice that sent a chill down my segmented spine. Then came the team assignments. The main screen flashed our names in a violently fluorescent yellow that felt like a visual punishment. My name, Zylos, appeared next to Scrix. Scrix is a Centauri, a reliable, multi-legged ally with incredible sensory organs, but an innate, incurable talent for worrying about everything. I found myself hoping his advanced sensors could detect impending tactical disaster, because my gut was telling me we were about to walk into one. And then there was the most baffling pairing of all, Captain Elara Voss and Vera. Vera is a Morpidian, over 10 feet tall when fully upright, a living, breathing tank of muscle and hardened chitin. He lumbered toward Elara as if walking to his own execution, his multiple ocular stalks drooping with a look of profound resignation. He was, by all accounts, a kind soul, a gentle giant, but his tactical approach was limited to overwhelming force and sheer resilience. Greetings, partner, Vera boomed on the subsonic frequency of his species. My designation is Vera. I'm strong but not fast. Please do not be disappointed. His honesty was both touching and terrifying in a combat scenario. Elara looked up. Far up. She was tiny next to him, her combat harness dwarfed by his bulk. Works for me, she said simply. I'm fast enough for both of us. The confidence in her tone wasn't bragging. It was a simple statement of fact. But underneath it there was something else. Something that made our most primitive survival instincts whisper a single chilling word. Danger. It was a danger born of calculation, not brute strength. We proceeded to the entry point. Sector 7, an architect's nightmare designed by sadists. Twisted metal corridors that caused magnetic interference, gravity wells that shifted randomly, sudden pressure drops that would collapse a weaker respiratory system, and zero visibility fog. And the drones? Military-grade units whose sensors could detect a human heartbeat from 50 meters away. This is crucial. A human's cardiovascular system is loud. Ridiculously loud. Their hearts beat like hydraulic hammers inside their chests. In theory, a human in Sector 7 should be about as subtle as a meteor hitting a glass building. 20 teams were gathered, preparing weapons and reviewing last-minute tactics. Scrix was on his third scan of the entrance, muttering algorithms that no one asked for. He was running complex probabilistic models on the deployment patterns of the enemy units, trying to calculate the optimal path that would minimize risk to himself and maximize my chances of survival. Elara and Vera were doing something completely different. Vera was tapping his massive forearm plates, checking their integrity, and Elara was stretching. Yes, stretching. As if preparing for a morning jog in a park, not an insertion into tactical hell. She touched her palms to the floor, her legs straight, performing a movement called a forward fold. A shocking, unnatural bend for a species with only two main limb joints. She rolled her shoulders in a way that seemed to defy known anatomy. Then, with terrifying liquid ease, she brought one foot up behind her head. The sheer flexibility was unnerving. For us, joint range is a structural vulnerability. For her, it was a weapon. Humans require pre-combat thermal activation, Scrix whispered, his anxiety levels spiking wildly. I believe their muscle efficiency is low. They manually increase blood flow to compensate for insufficient natural evolution. I watched, both impressed and deeply worried. It seemed inefficient, fragile. But before I could respond, Elara dropped into a low crouch and then sprang. A 2-meter vertical leap. She landed silently. Absolute, total control. No thump. No vibration. Just there. The landing was a whisper, a feat of biological engineering that no Centauri could match. Ready when you are, big guy, she said to Vera, that toothy, unsettling human smile on her face. She was baiting him, letting him know she was his shield. 3 minutes to insertion, Thalcora's voice announced. We all knew that was a lie. The Crucible was all about competition. 30 seconds. Elara became still. Not just quiet but motionless. Her shoulders dropped, her chest went flat. She was holding her breath, no visible sign of respiration. Her heart rate, which was broadcast on the status panel, dipped to an impossible low. 10 seconds, Scrix hissed, gripping my arm with a multi-jointed claw. I have a very bad feeling. I know I say that about everything, Zylos, but this time it is real, he insisted. He had calculated 14,000 ways this could go wrong. He had not calculated her. 3, 2, 1. Execution. The blast doors slammed open. Cadets surged forward, a mass of specialized bodies and weaponry, immediately enveloped by the synthetic fog. Distant sounds of buzzing drones filled the air. Scrix and I veered right, relying on his advanced sensors to navigate the maze. Our goal was methodical, protocol-driven movement. Contact, Scrix muttered. 30 meters. Elevation 4.2. The training drone appeared, its sensors methodically rotating. We began our coordinated textbook approach. And then an unexpected sound tore through the fog, a human whistle. It was a sharp, clear note that cut through the low-frequency hum of the maze. The drone instantly pivoted toward the sound, the source of the threat. It took its sensors off the ground-level approach. A fundamental tactical error engineered by the human. In that single moment, Captain Elara Voss fell from above. No one saw her climb the wall-mounted ducting. No one heard her jump from the 2-story maintenance gantry. No one understood how she timed the fall with such unhuman precision. She landed on the drone. Her small frame seemed to fold itself into the machine's casing. She didn't use a projectile weapon. She inserted something, her fingers likely tipped with a ceramic combat spike, a minimalist blade, directly into its primary processing port. A point of overwhelming pressure on a single vulnerable nexus. The drone shuddered once and died. 3 seconds. What was that? Scrix's voice, normally a calculated murmur, was a cracked whisper. His probability models had just been shredded. Elara rolled, disappearing back into the mist without a sound, a predator's shadow. She was already gone, moving to her next target, demonstrating a silent efficiency no one could have predicted. That, I said, my own voice shaking with the realization that changed everything we thought we knew, was a human hunting. At that moment we understood the truth. The Obsidian Crucible of Vhar'Zeth had never seen anything like her. The legend of the Quiet Reaper had just begun. Her first takedown was not a fight, it was an execution by surgical precision. A human hunting. The phrase felt like granite in my mouth, heavy with the weight of revelation. I, Zylos, a Cathari cadet whose ancestors mapped the stealth patterns of 1,000 star systems, had just witnessed the most fundamental breach of tactical physics I could imagine. Scrix was frozen, his multi-lensed eyes twitching with computational overload. His algorithms, designed to predict all outcomes based on known biological and mechanical limitations, had just returned a catastrophic error code. Anomaly detected. Source: human. We were still trying to process the first kill, meticulously executed, when the communication channel crackled with frantic alien chatter. Team 4, a pair of heavily armored Krillians, was reporting drone activity, their voices thick with the exertion of sustained combat. They were firing plasma bursts, lighting up the fog-choked corridor, announcing their presence with every shot. This was the conventional way: establish dominance through firepower and aggression. Then through the chaos came the system's smooth, detached voice. Elimination confirmed. Team Voss/Vhar'Zeth. Wait, what? Our team Zylos/Scrix was still struggling to secure our first takedown. The Krillians, a species built for rapid-fire engagement, were locked in a grinding firefight. Yet, Elara Voss and the gentle giant Vhar'Zeth had already scored 2 confirmed kills. Impossible, Scrix whispered, retracting 2 of his 6 legs in sheer confusion. Their entry point was not optimal for speed. Vhar'Zeth's mass is too great for swift traversal. This calculation, it breaks every known rule of movement. That's when I realized we were looking at it all wrong. Elara wasn't using the environment to hide herself. She was using it to hide her movements. We caught sight of them briefly in a low-gravity zone. It wasn't Vhar'Zeth who was moving slowly, it was Elara who dictated their pace, their rhythm. She was using his incredible mass as a mobile blind spot. Vhar'Zeth would take a lumbering step, which, due to the zero-G field, would result in a massive, slow-motion movement that perfectly shielded Elara from all angles. She would cling to his dorsal plates, her small, powerful hands finding purchase in his armor joints, effectively using him as a combination of armor and propulsion system. As Vhar'Zeth drifted past a column, his body cast a moving, complex shadow that extended for 10 meters in the diffused light. Elara, using that shadow as camouflage, detached from his side, moved 3 meters with that terrifying, silent speed, and reattached to his opposite flank before the shadow even finished moving. She wasn't running, she was shifting with the environment, maintaining a low profile and exploiting the massive visual and sensory footprint of her own partner. And the drones? They were designed to track the largest, most thermally active target. They saw Vhar'Zeth. They registered him as the primary threat, a walking priority target. Elara's low thermal signature and minuscule mass were literally being filtered out by the drone's processing unit as irrelevant background noise, possibly a small animal or environmental residue. She had weaponized insignificance. Zylos. Look at the data, Scrix suddenly exclaimed, his focus snapping back to tactical analysis. Team Voss/Vhar'Zeth has secured their 3rd elimination. They are moving along a path of maximum environmental disruption. The Sector 7 maze included areas of severe magnetic interference that played havoc with our sophisticated Cthari sensor arrays and the drone's guidance systems. Most teams avoided these areas because they couldn't see anything. But Elara Voss wasn't relying on technology she couldn't see. She was relying on those terrifyingly focused forward-facing eyes and her species' unique adaptation, muscle memory and instinct. While we were debating the failure modes of our own sensors, Elara was thriving in the electromagnetic noise. She knew the drones would be suffering interference, their visual acuity blurred, their movement erratic. She wasn't just adapting to the disruption, she was counting on it. She was using a chaotic environment as a form of sensory deprivation for her enemy. It was brilliant. It was counterintuitive. It was human. Another confirmation flashed, elimination confirmed, Team Voss/Vhar'Zeth. They had 4 kills. They were 1 kill away from winning the entire exercise. And it had only been 9 minutes since the insertion began. The previous record for this challenge, set by a highly decorated squad of Vhar'Zethian heavy infantry, was 22 minutes. Panic began to set in among the other teams. The comms system was a torrent of frustrated, aggressive noise. Cadets began abandoning their calculated paths, rushing toward the last known coordinates of the human team, hoping to either intercept their target or simply get a glimpse of this impossible phenomenon. We must move, Zylos, Scrix urged. If we cannot beat her, we must study her. I am shifting our trajectory to intersect with hers. I need more data on her traversal profile. We moved with Cthari speed, a low, gliding run, our stealth cloaks flickering to compensate for the shifting magnetic fields. We entered a long, narrow pressure duct, a section notorious for its sudden, violent air pressure drops. We saw Vhar'Zeth ahead of us, moving slowly, cautiously. He was now alone. Vhar'Zeth stopped and stood perfectly still. His immense form blocked the entire duct. Where was Elara? I looked at the status screen. Elara Voss's vital signs were still unbelievably low. A slow, controlled heartbeat, no discernible respiration. She was likely holding her breath again, a trick she used to become functionally invisible to thermal and acoustic sensors. Then Vera did something unexpected. He lowered one of his great plated hands and tapped a complex series of rhythms onto the metallic floor of the duct. Thump tap thump thump. Pause. Tap thump. It wasn't random. It was a prearranged signal. Vera, the gentle giant, was now a human-controlled sonar system. The rhythmic tapping was a percussion signal, exploiting the resonant frequency of the metallic ducting to map the internal layout and locate the last drone. And just as I registered the genius of this improvised sonic mapping, the system announced, "Drone detected. Proximity, 3 meters." The last drone was hiding just beyond Vera, in a small recessed maintenance alcove, a place of last resort. It was armed and waiting. Vera couldn't shoot it without hitting the back wall, and any plasma fire in this duct would risk a catastrophic pressure failure. But Elara hadn't asked Vera to shoot. Suddenly, a small projectile no bigger than a finger joint shot past Vera's elbow. It was perfectly weighted and perfectly aligned with the gap between Vera's plating. It wasn't a bullet, it looked like a simple, polished stone or a ceramic ball. But it had a purpose. It struck a single, crucial conduit on the ceiling of the maintenance alcove. The conduit, already weakened by the constant pressure fluctuations, ruptured. The immediate result was not an explosion, but a localized pressure release. The alcove rapidly depressurized. The drone, relying on pressure stabilization to keep its delicate internal circuitry aligned, violently convulsed. Its aiming systems went haywire, its weapons jammed, and its sophisticated gyroscope tumbled into chaos. It was neutralized not through force but through pure, weaponized physics. Elara hadn't even touched it. She used a simple, low-tech projectile to trigger a predictable environmental effect. Before the drone had even settled, a small, dark shape, Elara, slipped from a vent above Vera and placed her marker on the downed unit. She had used Vera to map the terrain, used his body as cover, used a simple object to trigger a chain reaction, and exploited a flaw in the drone's manufacturing she couldn't possibly have known about without intense prior study. She didn't fight the maze, she mastered it. The system boomed, elimination confirmed, Team Voss/Vera. Challenge complete. All other teams cease operations. Total time, 11 minutes and 47 seconds. Less than half the standing record. A fresh, stunned silence descended upon Sector 7. This time, it wasn't the silence of nervous anticipation. It was the heavy, cold quiet of total, absolute defeat. Every veteran cadet, every instructor watching the live feed, every species that prided itself on millennia of martial evolution, had just been shown up by a single, small human with a perfect understanding of weakness and a terrifying control over her own body. We watched as Vera gently picked Elara up, placing her safely back on his shoulder plate. She gave him that small, toothy smile, a gesture of appreciation that Vera, for the first time that day, seemed to return with genuine pride. When they exited the sector, High Strategos Thalcora was waiting for them, his administrative scales now a deep, thunderous crimson, the color of extreme, shocked contemplation. He didn't speak a word. He just stared at the human, whose breathing rate was now climbing back to normal, the exercise having cost her barely more energy than a brisk walk. That evening, the comms channels were no longer filled with chatter about technology or tactics. They were filled with fear. We had a new designation for the human cadet, a name that echoed with the chilling efficiency of her strike and the silence of her movement. The name that would forever stick to Captain Elara Voss was simple, terrifying, and utterly earned: the Quiet Reaper. The aftermath of the tactical exercise didn't bring the celebratory noise you might expect. Instead, the halls of the Obsidian Crucible of Vhar'Zeth were filled with an atmosphere of profound, uncomfortable evaluation. High Strategos Thalcora was not pleased. The efficiency of Captain Elara Voss hadn't just secured a win. It had exposed systemic flaws in the Crucible's training philosophy, which was heavily reliant on technological superiority and sheer biological resilience. My companion, Scrix, was utterly distraught. We sat in the mess hall, though neither of us could stomach the standard nutrient paste. Scrix was hunched over his data slate, his multi-lenses rapidly recalculating his probability models. "It is not possible, Zylos," he insisted, his voice a high-pitched, anxious whine. "I have run the drone's tactical software parameters against all known biological profiles." Her silence, the way she controlled her heart rate and respiration, it registered her as a non-combatant, a passive element. The system dismissed her. She weaponized vulnerability. She weaponized invisibility. I tried to offer a calming frequency vibration, a Kthari gesture of solidarity, but even I was shaken. She didn't just win the exercise, Scrix. She broke the logic of the exercise. We trained for direct engagement. She specializes in surgical removal. The immediate impact was felt in the next phase of training, personal defense and close quarters combat, CQC. Traditionally, this phase was dominated by the larger, heavier species, the Morpidians, the Krillians, and the brutal, four-armed Zylosians. For a human, this was meant to be their breaking point. In CQC, there is no place to hide, no environmental physics to exploit, just raw strength, speed, and endurance. It was designed to humble the smaller, less physically dominant cadets. The arena was a sealed, gravity-neutral chamber, a perfect, sterile kill box. The atmosphere was pumped full of a gas that slightly enhanced reflexes but also amplified pain receptors, ensuring every hit was registered. Our opponent was the instructor cadre wearing heavy impact gear. Their goal, neutralize the cadet. The cadet's goal, survive for 3 minutes. First up was Vera. He lumbered forward, a magnificent, chitinous fortress. He didn't survive 3 minutes. He survived 32 seconds. His sheer size was a magnet for focused, coordinated strikes from the 4 instructors, who used his bulk and limited flexibility against him, forcing him into a corner until he was pinned down by overwhelming, systematic pressure. The mood was somber. The Crucible had re-established its dominance. Resilience and size mattered. And then Captain Elara Voss stepped into the arena. The moment she entered, she did not look at the instructors. She looked at the floor, the walls, the ceiling. She was measuring the space, mapping every possible angle of attack and escape in her mind. Her smallness, which had seemed like such a vulnerability, now felt like a terrifying asset. The 4 instructors, all veterans of the Vhar'Zian Defense Forces, approached her with a cocky, coordinated formation. They were expecting to overwhelm her, just as they had Vera. They were expecting a desperate flailing, a desperate attempt to grapple or escape. What they got was water. The gong sounded and Elara moved. Not fast, but with an impossible fluidity. When the first instructor, a massive 8-foot-tall being named Instructor Krell, lunged at her, she didn't block. She evaded. A human body, unburdened by chitinous plates or rigid joint structures, is capable of sickening flexibility. She bent backward, her spine curving in a way that should have shattered her vertebrate column, ducking perfectly beneath the sweeping arc of his arm. It was less a defensive move and more an anatomical miracle. As Krell recovered from his missed strike, his massive bulk left a temporary void in the center of their formation. Elara didn't run away from the danger, she ran into the void. She was suddenly behind the instructor Krell, using him as a temporary shield against the other 3. It was genius. She had instantly turned a 4-on-1 assault into a series of 1-on-1 problems. The next instructor, a lighter, faster entity, moved to cut her off. Elara anticipated the maneuver. She didn't engage with a punch or a kick. She used a technique we had never seen before, joint manipulation. She grabbed the instructor's arm at the wrist and the elbow, and with a terrifying, precise twist, she didn't try to break the arm. She simply used the instructor's own forward momentum to leverage their body and send them flying directly into the path of the 3rd instructor, who was rushing in for support. 2 instructors were down, victims of a human using their own mass and speed against them. Now it was just her against Krell, the largest instructor, a being who could crush her with a single swipe. Krell roared, a full-spectrum display of primal aggression, and charged. Elara didn't panic. She didn't retreat. She waited. And in that final microsecond before impact, she did something truly incomprehensible to us. She dropped. She didn't just fall, she consciously released all tension in her body and turned herself into a collapsing object. She slipped beneath his charging form, right between his legs, grabbing onto his rear knee joint. This wasn't brute force. This was a flawless understanding of leverage. She didn't need strength, she needed a pivot point. With a grunt that was swallowed by the roar of the massive instructor, she pulled hard on that single vulnerable joint. Krell, caught completely off balance by his own massive forward momentum, pitched forward. His vast, armored form crashed into the ground with a sound that shook the entire arena, temporarily knocking the wind from his massive lungs. Elara was already on his back. She placed her forearm across his breathing apparatus and simply applied pressure. Not the crushing weight of a Zylosian, but a precise, focused pressure designed to shut down the airflow at a single critical point. The instructor tapped out. The timer had barely registered 2 minutes and 19 seconds. She hadn't fought them. She had solved them. She used physics, geometry, and a terrifying knowledge of anatomy to defeat 4 superior opponents with minimal effort. She was efficiency personified. The arena was silent again. The shock was deeper this time because this was a test of raw combat, a realm where technology and stealth were supposed to be secondary. She had proven that a perfectly utilized body, combined with a mind that thought in terms of mechanical advantage, could overcome anything. After the exercise, I saw Vera approach her. He looked at her with a new, profound respect. He didn't offer compliments but something far more meaningful. "Captain Voss," he boomed gently. "Your movements, they are like water." I felt shame for my failure to reach 3 minutes. But now I see. I used strength. You used knowledge. Elara smiled, that small, almost cold expression that was becoming her signature. "No shame, Vera. You're a tank. Tanks are supposed to be slow. I'm a scalpel. Scalpels are supposed to be small. We just need to work together to exploit those differences." She looked around the hall, which was now filled with the hushed, deeply thoughtful murmurs of cadets whose entire worldview had been shattered. "Every species here is better at something than humans. But humans," she paused, a hint of steel in her voice, "are the best at learning how to beat the best." That night, High Strategos Thalcora called a mandatory, unscheduled assembly. His scales were a serious, unchanging gray. The time for tactical analysis and competition was over. "Cadets," he announced, his voice solemn. "The results of the CQC and tactical trials are not a win for one team. They are a moment of necessary introspection for the entire Obsidian Crucible." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on the hushed audience. "Captain Elara Voss has not demonstrated an anomaly. She has demonstrated the untapped potential of an entire species." The energy in the room was electric. Every cadet knew what was coming. This was more than a performance review. This was a paradigm shift. Thalcora continued, his gaze sweeping over the audience until it rested, with unsettling focus, on Elara. "The Obsidian Crucible of Vhar'Zeth will, starting immediately, initiate a pilot program to integrate human combat units into advanced tactical and command positions. Humans will not merely be visiting cadets. They will be a structural part of our forces." The sheer magnitude of this decision sent a shockwave through the assembly. Scrix dropped his data slate with a clatter. Acrylian nearby let out a gasping, whispered curse. "More of them?" "And to spearhead this process," Thalcora concluded, his voice ringing with authority, "we need examples. We need leaders. We need soldiers who represent the best of what their species can bring." He took a deep breath. "I am therefore pleased to announce that Captain Elara Voss has been selected for an accelerated program in tactical leadership and special operations." The silence shattered into 1,000 different murmurs. Not shouts, not protests, but the sound of pure, unadulterated impact. Vera brought one of his gigantic hands down on the ground in a thunderous sign of pride and approval. Elara rose slowly, meeting Thalcora's gaze. She didn't look triumphant or scared. She just looked focused. Thalcora pointed at her. "She has proven herself not an anomaly, but an example of human potential. And the Council believes that potential must be fully developed." The murmurs exploded into a fever pitch of realization. They all knew this wasn't arbitrary. The Quiet Reaper had crushed every limitation, and now she was destined for something far greater than we could have imagined. The elevation of Captain Elara Voss to the Accelerated Tactical Leadership Program was a tectonic shift in the institutional history of the Obsidian Crucible of Vhar'Zeth. The decision by High Strategos Thalcora was not universally praised. While many, like Vera, saw it as a moment of necessary evolution, others, especially those cadets from species with long-standing military dominance, viewed it as a diplomatic concession, or worse, a threat to the established order. My companion, Scrix, had moved past simple anxiety and entered a state of frantic, obsessive study. He started spending his non-training hours in the library archives, poring over ancient texts and historical records, anything he could find on the biological, sociological, and psychological profiles of Homo sapiens. "They are a paradox, Zylos," he reported one evening, his multiple optics glazed over from lack of rest. "Their physiology is weak, they lack natural resilience and require high maintenance. But their history is a roadmap of constant, devastating internal conflict. They didn't evolve with war, they mastered it. They are the only species I can find that repeatedly waged war against themselves until they perfected the art of conflict. They are driven by internal, irrational motivation, a deadly combination." Meanwhile, Elara's training intensified. She wasn't subjected to the basic coursework anymore. Her instruction was tailored for maximum efficiency. She was now spending most of her time in specialized high-gravity simulated environments, learning how to command forces composed of wildly disparate species, each with unique tactical strengths and weaknesses. I managed to catch up with her briefly in the transit corridor leading to the command simulations lab. She was wearing a specialized, lightweight suit that integrated with her spine, designed to assist her in maintaining perfect posture and stability under extreme G-forces. She looked exhausted, but her eyes held that same terrifying, focused clarity. "Cadet Voss," I said, offering the Kthari greeting gesture, a brief, low-frequency hum of respect. She stopped, recognizing my species hum. "Cadet Zylos," she responded, her voice steady. "You're the one with the impressive sensor readings in Sector 7. Your analysis was sound, if incomplete." I was taken aback. "Incomplete? You won the challenge in under 12 minutes. My analysis could not comprehend your speed." She gave me that small, almost cold smile. "Your models assumed that speed was the objective. My objective was neutralization. Speed was merely a byproduct of finding the easiest path to the goal, not the fastest. You're trying to understand me by calculating my strength. You should be calculating my intent." "And what is your intent, Captain Voss?" I asked, feeling an intense, intellectual curiosity overriding my fear. Her gaze became distant, focused on something far beyond the corridor wall. "Survival. And competence. If I am going to lead the best, I need to be undeniably, terrifyingly competent. I need to leave no doubt that when I issue an order, it is the only correct order." This concept of compulsory competence, a level of mastery that forces compliance through sheer, undeniable effectiveness, was alien to the Crucible's culture of inherited rank and species dominance. It was a purely human concept, forged in the crucible of their own brutal history. The real test came a week later, during a combined arms exercise, a high-stakes, real-time command simulation where the stakes were severe disciplinary action for failure. Elara was assigned command of an assault group composed of 3 wildly different units: a team of heavy-armored Morpidian engineers, a squad of fast-moving high-firepower Krillian shock troops, and a surveillance unit of highly specialized but fragile Vhar'Zian scouts. Her opposing force was commanded by an established senior cadet, a Zylosian named Vexer, known for his rigid, by-the-book tactical approach and overwhelming use of force. The simulation began. Vexer immediately launched a massive frontal assault, a classic brute force move designed to crush the morale of the opposing force. The Krillian unit under Elara's command panicked. They were trained for lightning-fast incursions, not sustained defense. Their leader, a seasoned veteran named Rix, transmitted his distress over the command channel. "Captain Voss, we are exposed. Request permission to engage full plasma defense and retreat to secondary coordinates." The standard, protocol-driven answer would have been, "Permission granted." But Elara's response was chillingly counterintuitive. "Negative, Rix." Her voice was calm, cutting through the static of battle. "You will hold position and fire 3 short bursts into coordinates Delta 9-4. Do not fire to hit the enemy, fire to draw attention to the magnetic field anomaly in that sector." Rix was baffled, but the training in the Crucible instilled obedience. He fired the bursts, lighting up a small empty patch of the simulated battlefield. Nothing happened. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, Vexer's assault continued, seemingly undeterred. Rix almost issued a protest. Then the Morpidian engineers, moving slowly under Elara's direct command, arrived at coordinates Delta 9-4. They weren't carrying heavy armor or plasma cannons. They were carrying structural rebar and high-density magnets. They began systematically placing the material in the ground, in the area Rix had targeted. It was a trap. Elara hadn't retreated from the frontal assault. She had used the enemy's predictable aggression to bait them into a specific environmental zone. The Krillian fire wasn't meant to cause damage. It was meant to direct the Morpidian engineers to the exact, pre-calculated weak point in the simulated terrain's magnetic field. The moment the Morpidians finished placing the magnets, the entire area where Vexer's heavy units were concentrating collided. The opposing forces' internal magnetic dampeners were overwhelmed by the localized field, causing their heavy armor and internal guidance systems to violently seize up. They were physically immobilized, helpless. The final element of Elara's plan clicked into place. The fragile, fast Vhar'Zian scout unit, the unit that should have been routed by the heavy assault, swooped in. They didn't attack the immobilized units. They used specialized signal disruptors to broadcast the enemy's immobilized status across the simulation field, causing mass confusion among Vexor's reserve forces who were rushing to aid their commander. Vexor's rigid, predictable army was defeated, not by firepower, but by a masterful display of environmental manipulation and coordinated specialization. He had focused on strength. Elara had focused on vulnerability. High Strategos Thalcora terminated the simulation. The sheer, audacious brilliance of the maneuver had stunned the entire control room. Elara Voss had taken 3 vastly different, tactically incompatible units, and used their weaknesses to create an overwhelming strategic advantage. She had weaponized magnetic science, structural engineering, and broadcast psychology. I saw her later that day sitting alone again on the observation deck, looking out over the desolate training grounds. I approached cautiously, my heart rate accelerating despite my best Cthari control. "The broadcast was the most brilliant move," I commented, breaking the silence. "The use of the Vhar'Zian scouts to demoralize the reserves, it was not a tactical move, but a psychological one." She turned, her face expressionless. "War is a state of mind, Zylos. Most species fight for survival or territory. Humans fight for an idea. If you can break the enemy's belief in their own strength, you've already won." She paused, leaning against the cold metallic railing. "I spent a cycle in the archives studying the historical command protocols of this academy. Every single one emphasized force projection." "And you?" I asked, finally understanding the true depth of her threat. She looked at me, and for the first time, her eyes held a hint of a deep, historical sadness, the shadow of a species that had seen too much war. "I emphasize cost-benefit analysis," she said quietly. "My goal is to achieve the maximum result with the minimum expenditure of resources. That is the true human way of warfare. It's not about glory. It's about efficiency." That was the turning point. The cadets of the Obsidian Crucible didn't just respect Captain Elara Voss anymore. They were beginning to fear her analytical brilliance. They were no longer seeing an anomaly, they were seeing the future of warfare, and it was cold, calculating, and utterly unforgiving. The Quiet Reaper was no longer a name, it was a doctrine. Captain Elara Voss's elevation didn't just change her status. It fundamentally changed the training curriculum at the Obsidian Crucible of Vhar'Zeth. High Strategos Thalcora ordered an immediate overhaul, integrating human principles of efficiency, psychological warfare, and environmental exploitation into every phase. The days of relying solely on sheer mass or energy shielding were over. The future belonged to the meticulous planner, the one who saw the battlefield not as a place to fight, but as a system to be solved. For me, Zylos, the Cthari cadet, the lesson was painful but transformative. I stopped calculating for speed and started calculating for optimal failure point. I stopped viewing my stealth cloak as a way to hide, and started viewing it as a way to funnel the enemy into a calculated disadvantage. I began working closely with Scrix, retraining his algorithms to incorporate irrational human intent into our predictive models. Our friendship with Elara also evolved. It wasn't a casual camaraderie, it was a relationship built on mutual, almost academic respect for combat expertise. We saw her as the living embodiment of the Crucible's new doctrine. Vera, her gentle giant partner, had become her most steadfast advocate, his massive frame now moving with a calculated, deliberate purpose, ensuring that every movement maximized Elara's tactical advantage. The final phase of the Accelerated Tactical Leadership Program involved a high-level, multi-week command exercise known simply as the Gauntlet. It was a massive, simulated war game testing a commander's ability to survive and achieve objectives against overwhelming odds. Elara was given command of a small, under-resourced force, tasked with capturing and holding a strategically vital outpost against a well-funded, numerically superior opposing force led by the Academy's most decorated instructors. The simulation was brutal. Elara's force was pushed back almost immediately. She lost her main supply line. Her communications were jammed. Her heavy artillery was neutralized. It was a textbook scenario designed to force a commander to rely on instinct and brute resilience, the traits she supposedly lacked. But Elara didn't panic. She didn't rage. She retreated. She deliberately abandoned the highly defensible, high-value outpost and fell back to a series of low-value, geographically confusing positions. Her opponents, fueled by traditional military ego, saw this as confirmation of the human species' lack of tenacity. They pursued her relentlessly. They chased the retreating shadow of the Quiet Reaper. This was her masterstroke. Elara had not surrendered the outpost, she had ceded it. She had calculated the cost of defending it versus the cost of letting the enemy take it, and determined that the enemy's resources, time and arrogance were more valuable assets to waste than her own scarce units. She allowed the pursuing enemy force to overcommit, drawing them deeper and deeper into a labyrinth of canyons and energy disruption zones. Her command became less about giving orders and more about whispering highly specific, coordinated movements to her dispersed units. Vhar'Zeth's team, proceed to coordinates Gamma 7. Do not engage. Begin passive tunneling sequence. Rix's Krillian team, power down and hold position in the low thermal cave system. Your role is now acoustic deception. The enemy commander, confident in his pursuit, made the fatal mistake of dividing his forces to hunt her down. He spread himself thin across unfamiliar terrain, far from his centralized command structure. And then Elara struck. Not with a coordinated strike, but with a series of impossibly small, devastating acts of sabotage. The Morpidian engineers, led by Vhar'Zeth, had used their tunneling equipment to strategically weaken the structural integrity of the canyon walls and key choke points. They didn't need to collapse the walls, they only needed to make them unstable enough that a localized seismic event could bring them down. The Krillian team under Rix didn't use their plasma cannons. They used localized sonic emitters to create a highly focused, low-frequency vibration that, when aimed at those weakened canyon walls, triggered a massive, highly specific rock slide. The enemy's vanguard was instantly pinned down, isolated, and neutralized without Elara's forces firing a single offensive shot. The entire enemy command structure dissolved into confusion. They couldn't coordinate. They couldn't communicate. They couldn't move. Their entire pursuit force was defeated by a single human, a giant, and a few focused vibrations. High Strategos Thalcora ended the gauntlet. Elara's team was declared the victor. Not because they captured the objective, but because they eliminated the threat at a negligible cost to themselves. She had rewritten the definition of victory for the Crucible. We all learned the final, unwritten lesson that day. The greatest threat in the galaxy isn't superior firepower or armor. It's a being who can analyze a situation, find the single point of maximum leverage, and apply pressure with silent, perfect control. Elara Voss was not a fighter. She was a force multiplier. She was the one who made every weakness count and every advantage absolute. The legend of the Quiet Reaper was sealed. She had proven that the human species, with its history of ruthless efficiency and relentless calculation, deserved a seat at the table. They didn't just belong in the galaxy's elite military academy, they were destined to lead it. And that, my friends, is the incredible story of Captain Elara Voss, the human cadet who became the Quiet Reaper and changed the face of military strategy across the quadrants of Vhar'Zeth. If this deep dive into tactical brilliance, emotional struggle, and sheer, uncompromising human will resonated with you, and if you enjoyed watching a character triumph against impossible odds, then you know what to do. Help me spread the word about this amazing saga. Give this video a like, hit that share button, and if you haven't already, click subscribe and join our growing legion of story enthusiasts. We have an entire galaxy of stories waiting for you. Head over to the channel playlist right now to check out other incredible tales of redemption, impossible hope, and epic sci-fi adventures that we've covered. What was your favorite moment from Elara's journey? Was it the 3-second takedown, the CQC mastery, or the final brilliant strategy of the gauntlet? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, your suggestions for the next great story are what keep this channel moving forward. Thank you so much for watching and for your incredible support. Until the next transmission, stay focused, stay safe, and may your paths be clear of Quiet Reapers. Good wishes to you all.